Tonight, the centre of Brisbane sealed off after an armed gunman leaves a homemade bomb in an office. Good evening, Fiona Crawford with ABC News. A bomb drama in the centre of Brisbane is finally over. Minutes ago, bomb squad experts detonated a homemade device in an inner-city office tower. Police sealed off much of central Brisbane today after a gunman took control of the building. Weekend workers were told by police to lock themselves in the building as senior officers negotiated with the man who was armed with a rifle, 16 sticks of gelignite and a grenade.
The gunman apparently fired shots into the central city building before storming in. Police say it's not clear why the man, armed with a rifle and carrying explosives, targeted the building. Police cordoned off much of the city and tried to negotiate with the gunman. They were unsure whether he was holding hostages but weren't taking any chances. And there were other office workers in the building. A police spokesman said negotiators tried to convince the man to disarm himself but without success. They said he was still carrying explosives during talks. After almost an hour of negotiations, the man gave himself up.
With the help of other officers, he talked to the Vietnam War veteran for more than an hour, eventually persuading him to hand over his rifle and a grenade. During the tense negotiations, the man demanded a beer. Normally a request for alcohol wouldn't be met, but this was an exception.
He was willing to give up his firearm for one pot of beer, so it seemed like a good idea.
Sergeant Harrison admits he was shaken by the encounter.
I was pretty worried, and I was still shaking last night.
The hand grenade the gunman had with him was capable of sending debris flying for more than 100 metres. The gelignite could have caused much more damage. Fearing a huge explosion, police weren't taking any chances. Thousands of children were attending a pantomime just across the street at City Hall. One side of the building was evacuated as organisers tried to calm distressed children.
Because if 2,000 people panic, there is the potential for a very bad situation.
The gunman has undergone psychiatric assessment. He'll face court tomorrow charged with explosives and firearms offences. Rebecca Jensen, National 9 News.
Confronted a man armed with a dozen sticks of volatile gelignite. The sergeant and a colleague are being hailed as heroes for their role in disarming the disturbed Vietnam veteran in yesterday's city siege.
The arrest of the MLC gunman was the end of one story, but emerging from the drama, another tale of the extraordinary courage of two police officers who spent hours pacifying the bomber. As others fled a hail of gunfire, Sergeant Mal Harrison went in to confront the man.
He was sitting in the foyer with a gun across his lap. I didn't take my eyes off it for a fair while.
As heavily armed police cordoned off the siege scene, Sergeant Harrison was joined by another police officer, Detective Keith Banks.
He was very close to him. I think that he may have been in a lot more difficulty than me.
They persuaded the 43-year-old Vietnam veteran to hand over his rifle, but the man remained wired to more than a dozen sticks of gelignite.
A couple of times we were particularly worried in relation to his handling and treatment of the gelignite, but each time we managed to calm him down.
Police and Army bomb disposal experts who eventually defused the device say the ageing gelignite was highly volatile and correctly wired to explode.
I had actually mapped out an escape route.
It's reported both officers will be nominated for bravery awards.
Do you feel like a hero? Oh, no, not really.
Tom Hilston, 7 Nightly News.
When police knocked on the door of the boarding house, they were greeted by the voice of the suspect.
And he did not allow them into the premises, and they heard what sounded like a weapon being cocked.
Detectives alerted the elderly residents as the man barricaded himself inside the second-floor room.
He's got the fridge up against the door, the TV on top of it, and the windows around the corner of the walls are brick. So there's only one way in, and I don't know which it is, through the roof probably.
After evacuating the building, police blocked off the main roads in Spring Hill, convinced the man was armed with a high-powered rifle. The man in his late 30s was wanted for questioning over the shooting murder of a man in North Queensland last week. The body was located at a hidden drug plantation southwest of Cairns. Police knew the suspect had moved to Spring Hill.
Police investigations have been continuing since the location of that body in North Queensland. and surveillance was commenced on these premises last night.
After 6 hours of negotiations, police moved in, confident he had fallen asleep and was affected by drugs. Stun grenades were lobbed and the man was eventually stretchered out.
He's been taken to the Royal Brisbane Hospital under police escort for medical treatment.
Homicide detectives plan to fly from Cairns tonight to question him tomorrow. Steve Marshall, National 9 News.
Stun grenades eventually forced the man from the boarding house where he'd lived for 2 weeks.
Police closed off a large part of Spring Hill in Brisbane City just after 9 o'clock this morning, believing an armed man had barricaded himself in the guest house. Detectives had earlier gone to interview the man over a drug raid near Cairns. Remains of a 42-year-old
The 42-year-old Vietnam veteran had a grievance over a superannuation policy.
Inner city traffic ground to a halt on Saturday the 27th of November last year. A man armed with a high-powered rifle, a grenade and 16 sticks of gelignite entered the MLC building and began firing his weapon. The building was evacuated. He made it to the 16th floor before Sergeant Mel Harrison confronted him. In today's committal hearing, the officer relived the tense hour-long negotiations with Frank Corrie. He yelled and screamed and threatened to blow the building up. The defence asked, was he jittery? The sergeant replied, I was probably more jittery than him. Sergeant Harrison swapped the rifle for a beer and handed over negotiations to Sergeant Keith Banks. Banks said at times Corrie would laugh and joke, then his mood would change and he would move the wires of the detonator towards a battery. Corrie allegedly told Sergeant Banks he'd been paying superannuation to MLC for 3.5 years. But when he went to surrender his policy on the day before the siege, he was told he would have to pay $4,900 in administration fees. He allegedly said he was determined to make a statement and came to the building to splatter himself all over the foyer. He was eventually convinced to leave with the policeman and was examined by 2 psychiatrists. Corrie was committed to trial and an application for bail was refused. Steve Marshall, National 9 News.
And Kay McGruff, this is 7 Nightly News.
Tonight, the dramatic end to a Brisbane siege. And from Charleville, good evening from Frank Warwick. Police have used stun grenades to storm a Brisbane City boarding house and capture a man wanted in connection with a North Queensland murder. The raid ended a 6-hour siege that began when the man barricaded himself in a room, saying he had a gun and would take someone with him.
Police surrounded the Boundary Street boarding house shortly after 10 o'clock this morning, ordering bewildered residents out of their rooms and onto the street.
He said police, so I opened the door, he showed me the bed and told me the siege situation on upstairs, it's armed and dangerous.
What should have been a routine raid dramatically escalated when the suspect backed into his room, warning police that he had a gun and was prepared to use it.
Statement apparently has been made that he will take someone with him.
Holed up in a unit on the upper storey, a man wanted for questioning in relation to a murder at a remote drugs crop near Gladstone in North Queensland.
But he booked in for one night and then he decided to stay a week. Then he changed his mind when he met some people he knew and decided to stay one more week, and then he was going down south.
As the siege continued, Special Emergency Response Team police set up a command post and took up positions inside the building. As traffic was diverted around the scene, negotiators began communicating with the man who'd used a fridge to barricade the front door. Just before 4 o'clock, CERT officers went into action carrying scaling ladders to the building. Moments later, there was a roar as stun grenades went off. As a cloud of smoke rose over the building, police stormed the room, finding the man apparently unconscious on the floor. He was given immediate medical treatment and stretchered to a waiting ambulance. It's believed he was uninjured in the incident, but may have taken a drug overdose.
A number of syringes were located nearby him and other material which could indicate use of drugs.
The man was taken to the Royal Brisbane Hospital, where it's expected he'll be interviewed by homicide detectives. Tom Hilston, 7 Nightly News.
They heard what they thought was a gun being loaded as the man barricaded himself in.
Make sure that all police keep out of line of fire of that top back window.
Negotiations continued for hours as nearby buildings were cleared. After 6 hours of waiting, police moved in. Stun grenades were fired into the man's room. Fearing the worst, ambulance officers moved in as the smoke cleared.
A woman who saved a diver from a shark is one of 6 Queenslanders to be decorated by the Queen for bravery. All will be honoured by a ceremony later this year.
Some survived, others paid the ultimate price. The Queen, through the Governor-General, has decreed One and all, they should be remembered for their bravery. Dermot Tiernan, the likeable pub owner from Mergen, who, during a riot in 1993, was attacked and killed as he went to the aid of local police.
He's now firing again.
Simon Waller wrestled and overpowered a crazed gunman who was about to shoot other hostages at the Logan TAFE. He since learnt that police were seconds from opening fire.
Sort of, well, now's the time to sort of do something. It wasn't as traumatic as probably what a lot of other people think.
For Sergeant Mal Harrison and colleague Keith Banks, it was traumatic. First to confront a heavily armed gunman in the city's MLC building. They talked him out.
When I went in there, I didn't realise until I got right up to him that he actually had a bomb with him. I can remember getting a shock.
Dive instructor Sally...
A similar sentiment expressed by Sergeant Malcolm Harrison, who helped talk a gunman out of blowing up the MLC building just over a year ago.
He was threatening to shoot passers-by and ultimately blowing up the building and everybody in the near vicinity. I was pretty scared, to tell you the truth.
While he's honoured to receive the Bravery Award, Sergeant Harrison says it's not an experience he'd like to relive.